some sense of it all, but I can see it makes no sense at all. Is it cool to go to sleep on the floor? 'Cause I don't think that I can take anymore. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Today's Tuesday, January 13th, 2026. And, sorry, I got to start the stream there. Fraud pro-Palestine is awash in federal funds. So is Eagle, or I can't remember exactly how you say it, but it looks like Eagle spelled wrong. And that is being funded by federal funds. And there are investigations ongoing. There's a lot of fraud, I think, all around. And the fraud is directly taken from our tax dollars and given to activists on purpose, because the activists are doing what the federal government can't do and the federal government wants done. And so that's why we're experiencing all of this. And it seems like Trump is stamping that out in the United States to a degree anyway. And we'll see if he's successful. Trade with China or the US, that's where we're going to start. I think that Canada has to make a decision. And currently Mark Carney was just in China, or is currently in China. I think he's back in Canada now, but he was just in China. And I don't know if he got anything or has made any deals or anything like that, or if the people, talking heads, have influenced him, because almost everybody that I'm going to show you today says basically, why haven't you got the USMCA locked down, and why are you in China again? What exactly do you think you're going to get? Because Donald Trump doesn't like that, and Donald Trump's the guy we have to deal with, whether you like it or not. So that's interesting. Alberta signatures for separatism and the referendum talking about leaving Canada and becoming its own independent state or independent nation, and dealing more with the United States independently, has super long lineups and bad actors who are trying to get involved. Australia's hate speech laws are coming in, and they're coming in hot and heavy. And Canada keeps saying, oh yeah, we don't want to ban X, but they do want to pass speech laws that will have you locked up if you post the wrong thing on X. And so that's not so good. Freeland resigned, probably it's after the 9th, so she's probably gone, but apparently there's no official resignation letter. Has she taken her chair out yet? Trump wants zero income tax, and that'll be interesting because the whole world model is not based on what Trump's doing anymore. And I mean, if the Americans have zero income tax, why are we paying income tax like suckers, right? And if that continues for a long time, if the Americans get to keep all of their paycheck because America is so rich, and Canadians are paying 40% of their paycheck to taxes, how long are people going to tolerate that before they just leave for the United States? Honestly. And so that's going to put pressure. Brain drain, all sorts of other stuff. Brain drain is people who are educated in Canada and then they leave for the United States. And so Canada doesn't benefit from their production, their work, et cetera, et cetera. Even though Canada subsidized potentially or paid for or helped in some way, educated these people. Trump wants zero income tax. We talked about that. Trump says anyone dealing with Iran will get 25% tariffs, and digital healthcare card unveiled in Manitoba. And so digital ID is coming. They definitely want that to happen as well. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, we have to start with trade and China and what's going on. Everybody and their dog says this is a bad idea. I agree. I've been saying this for a long time. Carney is making all the wrong moves. If you could make all the wrong, it's like saying while you're trying to address people in a professional manner, right? Like you can't have be every second word for an hour-long speech. That's painful to listen to. Unfortunately, Mark Carney doesn't care. Stephen says, breaking, 2 Liberal MPs cut short their trip in Taiwan as Carney heads to China, saying they want to avoid sowing confusion about Canada's foreign policy. And confusion. The prime minister's in China. You have ministers in Taiwan. We're so confused here in China. We don't know what to make of that. So you better fix it, Carney. And so Carney's China apology tour makes sure that was fixed before it became an issue, right? And so it's only an issue in Canadian media. But I'm sure that the people who are prepping Chi are watching Canadian media. Hi, guys. Andy Lee says, there's no confusion about our foreign policy. The Liberals are as firmly in the PRC's grip as they ever been, People's Republic of China's grip as they ever been. And Stephen says, this is in response to 2 Liberal MPs cutting short their trip to Taiwan. So things that make you go, how deep in bed are we with China? Senator Leo Housakis says, is responding to Anita Anand, and Anand says, Iranians continue. Oh, this is Iran, not China. He's talking about China. Iranians continue to show the world their bravery as they stand up for their dignity and fundamental right to peaceful protest. Canada will continue to call on the Iranian regime to protect its own population. See Canada's joint statement on the situation. Oh, no, it's not. Calling on a terrorist regime to protect the people who spent years jailing and slaughtering. That'll do it. How about expelling 700 IRGC operatives still active in Canada? So I apologize. I thought that he was talking about making fun of Carney for going to China. I just misread. He's talking about Iran. We'll talk about Iran later. Trump is making noises on Iran as well. And so that's very interesting. CBC Watcher is getting the temperature of other people, pundits and things like that, about what they think about this whole China trip, not Iran. And Jeff Rutledge weighs in, and I'll just let him say it. Here we go.
I want to talk to you about this, the trade aspects of this. I mean, are there specific areas that these talks should focus on, such as Canada easing tariffs on electric cars, or China lowering tariffs on Canadian farm goods like canola oil and peas? What do you think is realistically feasible in terms of the trade deal?
Well, let me first start by saying that I think this is a fundamental mistake by the Prime Minister in making this trip to try to set a new strategic partnership, I believe is the term that he's using. I think it puts us in a very dangerous position in terms of our conversations with the U.S., who has been very explicit about their desire to isolate China in many ways. Their new Silk Road policy, which has been detrimental to many developing nations across the world, exploiting their rare earth metals, their ability to basically indenture labor through many of their policies, including building ports where they basically hold countries hostage for revenue dollars coming out of that. This is highly problematic. I don't think necessarily that the Chinese government, that is an authoritarian government for all intents and purposes, can be trusted in negotiating fair trade deals with Canada. And I think that there will be lots of promises that will be made to the Canadian government in their visit to China this time. And I think very little of them will be followed through on because China has one goal here, and that's defending and protecting their economy and promoting their economy. And their priorities have nothing to do with those of Canadians.
Accurate. And I think that, again, I agree with them. I think that we're making a mistake. The biggest trade deal that we need to be focusing on is the USMCA, and we need to be doing anything and everything that Trump asks in order to secure it, because if we don't, we're going to enter a depression. And the stupidity of our government, or calculated stupidity, they're not stupid. They're doing what their masters want them to do, which is to put Canada in a precarious financial situation. And they're trying to box out the United States. They're trying to economically impact the United States. But the United States is blazing a path forward through old, tried, tested, and true tactics that work. And the rest of the world is being left behind. And the citizens can see that. And so they've got to ban X. So CBC Watcher says, Harrison, the reality is that we would not be entertaining this conversation with China. Well, I'll just let her say it. Here we go.
Hey, last word on this, about this balancing act of values and value that we're kind of seeing on display with the China trip.
I think it's important to keep in mind that the human rights abuses that occur with China do not stop at Chinese borders. China and Russia, according to the NORAD commander, are regularly more actively buzzing our north. China has interfered in Canadian elections. There is more to be considered here than the plight of the Uyghurs, though that is also something that we should be preoccupied with. The reality is that we would not be entertaining this conversation with China if the Prime Minister had actually followed through on his promise to deliver a new economic and security partnership with the United States. Now we're backed into a corner of having friends in China and Qatar because we failed to secure the most important trade relationship that we have.
Right. Well, the U.S. plays a role in that too, though, Kate. Like, let's be fair.
How do we think the U.S. is going to respond to pulling back from Taiwan? How do we think that might look to the U.S.?
With Donald Trump, I'm not going to predict anything because I have no idea.
I don't think
turning the tables
favorably.
How do you think China would look on this? And the obvious answer is not, or excuse me, how do you think the United States would look on Canada cozying up to China? And the obvious answer of any thinking person is they wouldn't like it very much. And he says, well, with regards to Donald Trump, I can't predict anything, claiming that Donald Trump is irrational. I think he's very rational, and his behavior and actions prove that out, I think, quite a lot. Every single day. It's wild. And maybe people don't like him, but I think that he's got a very clear vision. I think he's articulated the vision very clearly. I think he's accurate in his assessment of the board, and his moves and the things that he has done have exposed people's bad intent, and they don't like it. And so their response is, oh, he's wild and crazy. He's only wild and crazy because he's only, quote, wild and crazy because the people who are being exposed don't like it and they want Trump to be the one responsible. I think Tim Walz has blamed Trump as well. Trump didn't allow the Somalis to come in and take over Minnesota, Tim. You did that. Here's Charles, and he's talking about China as well. Here we go.
That these EVs are like spy machines on wheels with all the data that they're able to gather. So I think it's unlikely that we'll do that. Premier Ford has suggested that he would encourage Chinese manufacture of EVs in Ontario. I'm not sure that solves the problem.
Interesting. Based on your experience, what have diplomats been doing behind the scenes to lay the groundwork to repair ties as this visit is upon us?
Well, I think that certainly we've eased down on a lot of our non-trade concerns. So Canada has been, compared to other major industrialized countries, muted on issues like Hong Kong, particularly Jimmy Lai, the Hong Kong publisher who has been subject to horrible detention for quite a long time, a man whose family is in Canada and who would settle most likely in Niagara-on-the-Lake and Taiwan exercises. And we haven't acted.
It's going on to, we haven't acted on the foreign registries. So he's finished one thought and then somebody cut it badly, moving on to another thought. So we'll just move on. Here is Dennis. He says, I spoke with CBC News today about Mark Carney's China trip, likely airing on the National. One point matters above all the others. The biggest strategic mistake Canada could make is touching the EV tariffs in any agreement or memorandum of understanding with Beijing. I'll explain why. Canada didn't impose EV tariffs in isolation. They were coordinated with the United States during the Biden administration to secure critical supply chains and address national security risks. U.S. national security frameworks don't reset every 4 years. On People's Republic of China, they're broadly bipartisan and highly consistent. Here's the risk. If Canada trades EV tariff relief for PRC market access, it undercuts an allied security framework and reinforces the U.S. position that its tariffs are national security driven. A weak fentanyl case becomes a strong China and supply chain case because of Canada's own actions. It isn't a given, but it sure seems like a short-sighted move and unnecessary risk to take. So lots of people don't like this China thing. I'm included. Basil the Great is talking about a different trade in the EU this time, and Germany is losing manufacturers who've been there forever. And Basil the Great says Mercedes to move manufacturing from Germany to Hungary. Net zero has just cost Germany big time, 20,000 job losses. This is what happens when you do net zero. Sky-high energy costs ruin everything. Viktor Orban keeps it simple. No immigrants, no net zero. And so sensible governance is possible, but you get lots and lots of pushback, right? People, and I mean, look at what happened to Bolsonaro, look at what's happened to Trump. There are people who do not want these people to win and will do anything and lie, do anything, up to including hiring people to shoot you at rallies. They will do anything to win. And still they lost. And even in losing, they will do anything to win. Let's move on. Let's talk about fraud. CP24. I've been talking about how the Minnesotan style fraud is happening in Canada, and I think it's actually a bit more greasy. The trajectory of tax dollars to funding fraud is faster than, if you could imagine, faster than Minnesota, I think. And so here's an example, and an example of the fraud and an example of them wanting to expand the fraud. Okay, this is all fraudulent. We didn't need food banks for the most part, even though not everybody was rich in the 80s. The numbers of food banks usage now dwarfs it. And even you can't fix everything for everybody, right? A society is going to have extremes at one end or the other, and you can't fix that for everybody. Communism doesn't fix that. And so while it wasn't perfect in the 80s, I don't think there was this embedded, entrenched, fraudulent layer that's taking up probably 75% of the funds. Does that make sense? So I think probably the people in the 80s who were using food banks needed the food banks in a way that was pretty just a way that society tries to balance that out. And now I think it's all fraud. Mostly fraud. CP24 says Daily Bread files police report alleging misuse of funds by Scarborough Food Bank. Toronto's Daily Bread Food Bank has filed a police report alleging multiple financial discrepancies against one of its member agencies and has said it will stop funding and cut all ties with the organization. In a statement, Daily Bread CEO Neil H. said that the organization was made aware of serious allegations, including the misuse of funds, that's fraud, and concerning governance practices involving Suman Roy, the founder and CEO of Feed Scarborough. Upon learning of these concerns, Daily Bread Food Bank acted promptly and responsibly and ceased funding to the Feed Scarborough organization while continuing to make sure food got to the people of South Scarborough, they said. He said the Daily Bread retained external legal counsel to conduct financial investigations and shared the findings of that investigation with the Toronto Police Service. So here's the problem. Invoices containing alleged irregularities submitted by Feed Scarborough to Daily Bread. Documents submitted to the Toronto Police from sources with knowledge of the investigation and reviewed by CTV News note that Feed Scarborough is one of Daily Bread's largest member agency food banks and receives millions of dollars worth of food from the Toronto organization each year. In addition to the food supplied, the documents said Feed Scarborough was given grants worth $620,000 between 2021 and 2023 to be used on operations and capacity projects. It's alleged that Daily Bread received multiple vendor invoices totaling over $18,000 from Feed Scarborough that the vendor has no record of, which led to the discovery of irregularities with these invoices. Another alleged discrepancy was the purchasing of food from a construction company that was installing shelves at Feed Scarborough's warehouse. Irregularities were noted with these invoices as well, the documents state. It also claimed that Daily Bread received a $10,000 invoice from a vendor without a web presence, leading Daily Bread to hire an external company to conduct a background check. That background check reportedly found evidence that Roy was involved with the vendor in an ownership capacity. It also alleged that Roy was reimbursed for over $110,000 in expense claims for items, including gift cards and rent, through checks that Roy signed as payable to himself. So, fraud everywhere. George Strombolopoulos, I guess, says food banks visits in Canada are at record highs. That used to mean emergency. Now it means wages, rent, groceries, and debt are misaligned. When a country normalizes food banks for working people, it's no longer charity, it's infrastructure. I think it's fraud kickbacks. And yes, there's huge use of the food banks. And I'm sure there are above board food banks. I'm just saying that possibly there are fraudulent, like say you arrive in Canada and say your uncle or cousin owns a restaurant and then you own a food bank and then you say, Uncle, I can get you like cheap bread or I can get you cheap food. And the uncle says, great, let's do that. And then so you're supplying a restaurant with cheap food bank food and the food bank usage goes up because you're supplying a restaurant with cheap bread and everybody's taking kickbacks and the food bank is like, it's like punching somebody in the dark, right? Victimless crime. Except the victim is the taxpayer in the food banks. And they say, oh, well, the taxpayer can handle it. It's just a little bit, right? And no? How about no, right? So it's one of those things where the homeless industrial complex is not limited to just the homeless. It is those poor people who need to eat, those poor people who need X and Y and Z, all of this stuff. I think it's all fraud. I think it's rife with fraud. And so that's concerning. Shane says, worth reading a deep dive into how taxpayer dollars are increasingly funding activist causes far removed from core public services. Civic engagement matters, but so does transparency, accountability, and alignment with broad public priorities. Canadians deserve clarity on where their money goes and whether it's delivering real measurable value. So this is more fraud, and our taxpayer dollars are directly being funneled into this crap, right? Here's that, what's his name? National Post says the mammoth quantity of activism fueled by the taxpayer money. And it goes through, I'll just read all of it. The group Toronto Palestinian Families was given $99,500 for a program they pitched as combating anti-Semitism and anti-Palestinian racism for all of 24. But as Newman documented, Toronto Palestinian Families had a history of vocal anti-Zionist advocacy. They've even used their social media to share content from Palestinian Youth Movement, a group that openly celebrates the October 7th attack on Canadian streets while they were still unfolding. It's a window into the vast archipelago of government grant money ending up each year in the hands of full-time activists. And it's an archipelago that's expanded dramatically under the Liberals, with whole new categories of government grants earmarked for everything from gender equity to climate action to anti-racism. Here are 3 examples of just how much activism is being footed by Canadian taxpayers. And these are just cursory examples, or cursory sample. Key an activist buzzword into the official Government of Canada database of grant recipients, and it will yield dozens of others. Canada's leading trans advocacy group is mostly government funded. EAGLE, so EGALE. Canada was founded in 1986 as a charity pushing for equal rights for gays and lesbians, and claims the title of Canada's leading organization of gay people and issues. Of late, it's been at the forefront of defending frontiers of gender identity. This has been most visible in EAGLE's vocal opposition to new Alberta laws barring males from women's sports or banning the prescription of puberty blockers to minors. EAGLE lawyers are in court to sink both policies, and somewhere along the way, EAGLE Canada's budget has become majority dependent on government. A profile by Charity Intelligence Canada pegs EAGLE's government funding around 69% of their total revenue. For fiscal year 23, they brought in $4.2 million in government funding versus just $1.5 million in donations. Taxpayer funding is also paying the bills. And sorry, just to give a little bit more context, when you give people $4.2 million, you're incentivizing participation. You're making it look like they're more popular than they really are. Really, they got 1.5 million in donations, and that would be a death spiral. Like if you go from almost 7 million, almost 6 million to 1.5 million, you've got to let go your staff. You've got to let go. You're less effective, and that less effective reach brings down your donations, impacting your bottom line. When you scaffold this up, when you support this with tax dollars, then they don't die. Bad ideas fester. And so, unfortunately, we're paying for this bad idea to fester. Okay, taxpayer funding is also paying the bills of Queer Momentum, the group led by trans activist Faye Johnson. Among one of Queer Momentum's causes in the last calendar year was reacting against conservative calls for male offenders to be barred from women's prisons based on self-identified gender. And another one, the pro-Palestine cause is awash in federal grants. Toronto Palestinian families made headlines largely because it was a particularly brazen example of anti-Semitism funding being directed into anti-Israel advocacy. Federal money can also be found in the budgets of any number of organizations that has been pushing anti-Israel policy in Ottawa, or even in accusing Canada of complicity in Gazan genocide. And I think this has been explained as China trying to take the moral high road. And so the whole Israel blah blah blah. I wish Canada was first and Israel is its own country and not our responsibility, not our deal. Nothing to do with us other than trade. Like that's the way it should be. We don't have a say because it's not our country. They don't have a say in what we do because not their country. But that's not how it is. Here's Secretary Bessent. He says we're going after the fraudsters. We're going after all of them. We've been watching and we know where the money's gone, and we're gonna get them no matter where they are, whether it's in a couple counties over or if they're in East Africa. Here we go.
Organizations that are behind this.
Jack, that is what we have started a few months ago. We are going to, again, what we do is we follow the money, and all of these agitators who are causing violence night after night, Portland, Minneapolis, the other locations, someone is funding them. When they have lasers that they blind DHS officers with, when they hold up all the same umbrellas, someone bought those umbrellas, and there is a money trail, and we are going to follow it. So Treasury through FinCEN can do that. IRS has a badass group called Criminal Investigators. Anybody watching your show who wants to...
I saw the Law and Order. It wasn't very good. Criminal investigations. Here's Bessent again. He says Minnesota AG Keith Ellison took donations in exchange for overlooking Somali fraud. And so we're not going to play that because we got to keep going. I've got to say goodbye to the stream as well. We're doing our grab bag of governance, and I've got a bunch more other stuff. This freedom of speech stuff is absolutely wild. There's a whole bunch of other news that's wild and crazy. If you want the whole show, head over to CanadaPoly.com. If not, that's okay. I will be around tomorrow. And for everybody else, we will carry on in just a second as soon as I kill the stream. Done. Web Canoe. Okay, I don't want to listen to Web Canoe. Wiretap Media. People were pointing out